finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
All right. Thank you for listening and welcome back to BS Free MD. May, what do we have on tap today? I know it is an awesome interview.
All right, everybody, buckle up because you love all things wellness, longevity, and women's hormones and health. And today we are talking about all those things with our guest, Kristin Mallon, who is a certified nurse midwife. And she is basically a menopause expert and feminine longevity expert, breast health expert, published author, and mother of four. She graduated from the University of California, Berkeley with a degree in psychology and completed her bachelor's degree in nursing at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland. Then she completed her master's in science and midwifery at New York University. She began practicing as a board-certified nurse midwife in private practice in Brooklyn, New York. And then in 2022, she co-founded Femgevity. It's a telemedicine company focused on menopause and feminine longevity, providing concierge care for women seeking personalized health care. Femgevity leverages healthcare achievements to establish integrated health services for menopause guidance to advance women's lifespans. Her and her partner, Michelle Wespelway, have an amazing company, and our interview with Kristin was awesome. We basically kind of touch on all the key pertinent topics for what is longevity, what do women in their 40s and 50s and beyond need to do to enhance lifespan and quality of life, to things like what exercises or diet are best or beneficial to lower just your risk for cardiovascular metabolic diseases, but also give you quality of life. And then we get into testing, what it costs, to all kinds of other topics. So there's a lot in this episode. If you're interested in pursuing your best life from your 40s into 50s and beyond and living top quality life, you got to listen to this. All right. Well, here we are. Welcome, Kristin, to the show. Thanks for being here with us on BS Free MD to talk about your company, what you're doing in the menopause and longevity world with Femtech, and I don't know, helping women live longer, better lives, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey, so why don't you just start off, and I'll let you tell our listeners just a little bit about your background, how you got involved in this. I know that you're a nurse midwife and now you're doing menopause treatment and therapy. So share a little bit about your background and how you got into this.
Yeah, great. So thanks so much for having me. I mean, I love the name of your podcast. So you can imagine like me being a midwife. And, the reason why I didn't go into medicine is because I probably couldn't have handled all the rules and regulations that went along with medicine. And, midwives are kind of known as being like a little bit on the edge. So I love it. It's great. So I'm a certified nurse midwife. I've been a midwife since 2006. And I have been working with women really since then. And then, obviously started my career really delivering babies, working with childbirth, pregnancy. But the women that I worked with back in 2006, they were in their 30s and 40s, 20s, 30s and 40s. But the women in their 30s and 40s are now in their 40s, 50s, even some in their 60s. And they're really looking for solutions for menopause, perimenopause, hormonal changes that are associated with aging, and then longevity solutions. I think something happens to women when reproductive longevity kind of comes to its conclusion that they start thinking about long-term longevity. And so I really saw this significant need. And, initially I was like, okay, let me just find someone to refer these women to because it really seemed like a niche thing. And I was really shocked to find that no one in medicine has really kind of picked this up. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. And I'm happy to get into why that happened. But, OBGYNs haven't really picked it up very much. Internists, they're kind of, I call them the Renaissance, like yourselves, the Renaissance people of medicine. So they kind of are, they have every type of medicine under their belt, like every type of art, watercolors and sculptors and painters. And so it's hard to be such an expert in something so niche. And then the same thing with endocrinologists. I think because there's not really CPT codes for menopause care, it doesn't pay the same way that Addison's pays or diabetes care pays. So why would they go into menopause care? So I think that kind of left women empty. So then I was like, okay, well, if there's no one doing it, I can't leave my patients without nothing. So then I started to kind of look into it. And my business partner, Michelle Wispelway, she comes at it from a laboratory diagnostician perspective. So she worked in the lab industry her whole career and really saw how, a lot of other companies, especially kind of like, I call them like the vending machine dispensaries now, that where you can just kind of like fill out a form and they like send you a prescription in the mail. They're not using any laboratory data to kind of prescribe, or they're not really using any of the tools and the tricks and the trades that we're kind of familiar with using as practitioners. And so I thought the two of us kind of came together and we were like, wow, there's this like significant need. Like, I mean, we were just blown away by how many women are lost and how many women need help. So that's kind of why we started Femgevity. And I'm incredibly passionate about longevity. So I've always been I think really afraid of death. And I think like my aunt, who's kind of my grandmother, she had a funeral home when I was growing up. And I think she kind of always scared me because, people would come in and they would die of all sorts of different reasons. And I think she was like hyper paranoid. And I think that like rubbed off on me in some ways. And so that kind of translated into where I am today. And so then when you are kind of afraid of dying, then you kind of look into, well, how do I prevent that? And then not only like, is it just about death, but it's also about like, how do I prevent this marginal decade of my life where I'm still able to play tennis and hike and play with my grandchildren and have the life that I always envision. I always think about like, can I get on a plane? Can I put my suitcase in an overhead bin? I want to do all these things when I'm retired, but will I be physically capable and able to do that? So that's really kind of, how Michelle and I started Femgevity.
Yeah, there's really two issues I see, because we have been over the last decade or more, dealing with aging parents, and my parents have since passed away. And, they had great lives. My dad made it to almost 89 and my mother was 92. But at the same time, we look at our careers and what we've done and how we've done our best to try to extend people's lives without necessarily extending their quality. And I understand that there's just gaps in technology because that's just the nature of how technology's developed. But I think of my mother, who had a aortic valve replacement in her early to mid 80s. And, that was great. I mean, she had better exercise tolerance. That was all great. But the downside of that is it actually extended her life so she can be miserable for the last 3 or 4 years of her life.
Exactly.
And so anything we talk about longevity, I always go, okay, that's great. But it's exactly, there's the two pieces. If I make it to 89 like my dad, or I make it to 85, but at 80, I'm still sexually active and I'm still going for walks and I'm still golfing, that's a total win compared to making it to 90. And the last 10 years, you're basically just, sitting around not able to do anything. So how do you kind of define the difference between just living longer and living, better?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So in longevity medicine, which is kind of like the term that we're longevity medicine practitioners are kind of using to kind of term this field that we're saying that we're in now, the pioneers of this field. So you're talking about lifespan and health span. So lifespan is like just living longer to live longer. And that's so Dr. Peter Attia is kind of like the godfather of longevity medicine, right? And so he calls it medicine 2.0 versus medicine 3.0. So medicine 3.0 is what he ascribes to and what we ascribe to. And he's kind of like our guru, and a lot of our protocols and a lot of what we do at Femgevity is based off of, I've been an avid follower of his for 10 years. And it's medicine 2.0, which is like the old way of doing it, and the way you and me kind of grew up in, is really good at extending lifespan, but it's not good at extending health span, which is having a healthy, robust life and being able to do these things like have sex and lift and walk and exercise into your marginal decade and up to that last year of your life. And so that's what longevity medicine is aiming to do, because people say that all the time. And, we even talked a little bit about this before the podcast started, like, well, and people say that to me all the time. Oh, you're in longevity medicine. Like, oh, I don't know if I want to live till I'm 90. And I'm like, well, what if you could feel really close to how you feel now? Like, would you want to? And then people are like, yeah, of course. And even Dr. David Sinclair, who, he's not like us. He's not a clinician. He's a scientist, which I think is a very big difference between someone who's putting their hands on patients and who actually has interaction with patients every single week or, every single month, versus someone who's in a lab, like testing yeast and mice and things like that. But he's like, well, the first person to live to 150 is alive today. And I think that's true. I think that we are going to get better at extending lifespan, but longevity medicine is about extending both health span and lifespan. And that's how we define it.
I love that, because I think, and we could get into all the reasons, like why, and are people really afraid of dying? But I think as our population starts aging more, and the baby boomers, the biggest, the giant core group of people are starting to get into this part of the golden years. They realize it's like, yeah, I don't want to be like my parents. I don't want to be crippled up in a home. If I'm going to be alive, I want to be literally like alive and doing the things I love. And there might be, a lot of people might not have the same fear of death as you or others. I think the thing is, for me, it's like, I want to go full tilt, like feeling great. And then when I'm done, pull the plug. Nobody has that kind of control, but nobody wants to have this longevity, you're right, and be miserable. You want it to be a time of your life where you feel productive and you're able to do things and have better health. So I would rather have a shorter life that's at least filled with quality life. And I think that's most people.
Well, and we'll probably open this can as the discussion goes on, but we're fighting an industry that literally creates chronic disease.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I might, maybe I shouldn't say it on the podcast until I have it, but I really want to make t-shirts that say guns don't kill people. The FDA kills people. And it's the food, and it's the F part of it that's probably worse than the D part of it. The food side has been so toxically poisonous for such a long period of time that, we now have ads for injectable peptides for diabetics. And they just put, they used to have like the kind of vigorous looking person, fairly fit, walking down the beach. Now they just put morbidly obese people on TV because they know that that's their market. And you're normalizing things that are terrible for your health, terrible. You can't even live normally. And yet it's just, we're fighting that side of the industry. And that's why we're so excited to talk to somebody like you, because with our podcast, we have just been beating the drum about this. It's like, no, we are killing ourselves. We're decreasing lifespan, but charging people thousands of dollars a month for medications that you wouldn't need if you just ate a correct diet, not even exercised.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, not only what's in our food, but the way we farm and the toxins and the pesticides, and then, what we found in our water. And, I think somebody did a study about like, they found like, beta blockers in water, because so many people are on that medication that they're urinating it out and then it's getting into the water supply. So yeah, no, I totally agree with you that there's a significant, we have sick care. And one of the reasons why I really got very passionate about starting Femgevity is that it's time that doctors and, medical practitioners like us and like myself, we reclaim medicine and we make medicine about wellness again. And it's not just the acupuncturists and the chiropractors and the nutritionists and the naturopaths that are doing well care, but that medical doctors and medical practitioners, because we know medicine. We're trained the best in physiology, the body, the human anatomy. We have the best training, but we learn so much about disease and pathology. So I always say, people ask me all the time, like, what's the difference between a midwife and an OBGYN? And I always say, like, midwives are really trained in normal birth. Like, what's normal? What's physiologically normal? What are the deviations from normal? Is that within normal, but like on the standard deviation of like, oh, kind of normal, not normal? And OBGYNs are trained in what's abnormal, how to manage abnormal. How is this falling off the how does this fit into the abnormal category? Or how is this abnormal? Or what else do we need to test for? Because this could become abnormal in some way. And I want to pull back medicine towards our side and be like, no, medicine can be about medicine 3.0 and about prevention and about strategies for wellness and longevity. And, when you go to the doctor every year, it's like, well, your liver enzymes are, 30 and 26, and your hemoglobin A1C is 5.9, which is insane. And your fasting insulin is 10, also not normal, and come back and see me next year. Well, it's like, well, why are we waiting for people to get sick and get a chronic disease before we start intervening and start doing something about that? 5.9 hemoglobin A1C, which, is considered pre-diabetic, is totally not acceptable at all. I would consider that way, way above the norm of what's considered normal. And I think that's what we do at Femgevity, is we just kind of start applying these stricter guidelines to medicine and health, rather than letting the allied health practitioners bear the burden of all of it. They're allied health professionals. They're meant to help us. We're meant to work together. They're not meant to bear the brunt of everything.
I love it, because what you're saying right there is that these standards that we've called is, the borderline of flipping into abnormal, is that people can do better. I mean, you can take those values and say, well, yeah, that would be considered normal. It's kind of bumping the rev limiter. Therefore, we'll just ignore it until it's a disease state.
Exactly.
Instead of doing something about it. And, we have this conversation a lot about, is that the role of family practice docs, or is it in the role of people like yourself, companies that extend out, that have because we're trained in the disease model. And if, if you're wanting to be the OBGYN that does the surgeries for the cancerous cases, et cetera, that's fine, because that's a skill. But we definitely need more people like yourself and companies like yourself doing the wellness piece to keep people away from us who are here to do the disease model.
No, and that's exactly right. I it's coming from sort of a church perspective. There's churches, and then there's like, missionaries that go out, and but I don't think, I think doctors should be trained in disease and should be recognizing disease. I think we should be completely 100% revamping what we do in medicine, so that we focus on health. But that shouldn't necessarily be the doctor, because, you don't want the holistic trauma surgeon.
Yeah.
You want the trauma surgeon that absolutely lives and breathes
trauma
for putting your femur back together and making,
right.
So
to that, but so you need both. And I think we need more of what you're doing. Absolutely. Because look at we've got enough disease model to take care of right now, which is really
yeah. But the problem, and I understand what Kristin's saying. The problem with the disease model is you don't get paid till it's a disease. So now everything's a frickin' disease.
Yep.
Right. So everyone's an addict. Everyone's but the time to intervene in those diseases. And if you actually look at studies on type 2 diabetics, once you make the diagnosis, you're basically locked in. Even if you go back to an A1C, of 5 or less, and you become super fit, there's really no evidence you get much life extension, because you've already been suffering with decades of inflammatory abuse from your high blood pressure and your metabolic disorder and your, high insulin levels and high glucose and so forth, that actually you feel better, but it may not even make a difference in your longevity at that point. And now we have type 2 diabetics as teenagers, which is a total disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think also, like, you bring up this really great point. Yeah, absolutely. Doctors should definitely be trained in pathology, and we definitely need trauma surgeons and oncologists and, neurosurgeons. And, but there's this huge problem that we see coming down the pipeline of, well, we're going to have this clinician shortage. But if we shift how we manage healthcare and we shift more towards wellness and prevention, then we won't. We're still going to have those types of practitioners. We're still going to be graduating the same amount of people that are going to still be there for oncology and neurology and all of these things that we need. But we're going to have less people that need, chronic disease management, because if we use wellness and we use health and we use longevity medicine, hopefully in the way that it's meant to be utilized, then there's a path to kind of solve for that, the clinician shortage issue that's coming.
Interesting point about that. Yeah, I like that thought.
Well, right. I mean, it's Scandinavia, right? Everyone tries to attribute Scandinavia's socialized or more socialized healthcare system to why they have better health. No, I think it's because they eat fish and cross-country ski everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
they have a obesity rate that is virtually zero compared to ours. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
And they sauna.
And those are,
Yeah.
that stuff's free. Like, you don't need a healthcare system to tell you that, eating tons of fish and cross-country skiing and skating everywhere is probably a really good idea.
Yeah.
But we want to medicalize that because we want to make it into like a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Well, then becomes the big question of how to motivate people to the society as a whole and the culture to change. But so I know our listeners want to probably get into the nitty gritty and details and specifics of like what you do and what you recommend and how that's impacting people. So I kind of want to shift gears and to really, we could do all the philosophy of how to change the healthcare system in the world, but we do that a lot. So let's talk about what Femgevity is doing. So it's definitely, I know it's a telemedicine company, and it's focused on menopause and feminine longevity, right? It's not tailored to men at all. So if men are listening on the show, they can just direct their wives or help them out with this. But or do you have any kind of affiliates in the male world as well?
Yeah, so we are actually starting to treat men, although it's not something that we're advertising on our website, or it's not something that we're kind of putting out there, mainly because we've had so much success with women that they want their partners to be treated too. So
yeah,
we are treating just a very, very few amount of men, but 98% women.
So let's start with talking about what happens. And, looking at the 40s and 50s and before they get to you. So what would you say that the most important things are for women to start looking at as they get towards menopause and that time period where their hormones are shifting or not, to start improving their health?
Yeah. So what I noticed is when I kind of started delving into this menopause space and understanding perimenopause and menopause, I was just shocked at the profound impact that hormones, hormone replacement, hormone supplementation, bioidenticals, I mean, whatever word or term you want to use when it comes to menopause support and menopause therapy, I was shocked by how much it impacts cardiovascular health, cognitive, Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and bone loss prevention. I was just shocked. And, what I've noticed working with women for, 2 decades now is that whether a woman chooses to have kids or not, or that's, her life kind of path ended up being children or not, there's something that happens in the 40s. The menstrual cycle starts to change and her reproductive longevity comes to a close, and she starts to think differently. She starts to kind of focus less on the menstrual cycle and less on reproduction, less on preventing pregnancy, if that's kind of the path that she's been going down, or less on her reproductive choices and more on perimenopause choices, menopause choices. And then I think thinking about, okay, well, this happened to my mom, this happened to my aunt, this happened to my grandmother. Like, what do I do? What doctors do I need to start seeing? And that's when screening starts to happen. So something happens at 40, you get the mammogram. Now we're starting to get colonoscopies at 45. And I saw this like significant opportunity to educate women about how menopause therapies can be in fact supportive for whatever type of risk factor they're at risk for down the line long term, to prevent them from having that marginal decade, the last 10 years of their life where they're, like you said about your own parents, where they're suffering and they're like, okay, well, what is the point of this? So, I mean, women and men too, they really are faced with really kind of four different diseases that are kind of, I think what they're most at risk for in their lives. One is cancer. The other one is cardiovascular disease. Then there's neurodegenerative disease, so Alzheimer's and dementia, and then metabolic disease. And if you look at a woman's health history and you look at her family history, you can kind of figure like there's usually 2 of the 4 that she's most at risk for. And then a lot of times how she handles her menopause transition will actually improve or has the opportunity to improve her longevity into her 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I just thought that was absolutely fascinating that hormone replacement or menopause support affects something so many decades later. And so I thought, wow, this women need to know this. And that's a big part of what we do at Femgevity is we educate women about the choices that they make now at their 40s and 50s can impact them in a very positive way down the line.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, there's a big shift in that thinking because there's still a lot of publications in the mainstream Western medicine world that say, they're still saying it's negative, that you should only be on it for the shortest duration amount of time possible and try to wean off after 3 to 5 years, and that it could be more harmful, or that you don't need it, and that it's just a natural part of life, and people have gotten by without it. But
it's so devoid of common sense,
right?
Like the Nurses' Health Study, the steaming pile of crap that the Nurses' Health Study was.
Oh yeah,
I'll give you my honest opinion.
Oh well, I think we all know now. Hopefully, but we want to tell everybody.
But you think of this just very practically, okay? So if you are on hormone replacement as a woman, okay, what is going to kill you when you're 80 or 90 years old? It's going to be a fall, or it's going to be cancer, or it's going to be cardiovascular death. Right. And if you make it to 90, it's probably cardiovascular or an accident.
Right. Yeah. Well, 1 in 4 women die of heart disease. So.
Right. So when you think of this and you go, like, my mother had a hip fracture and a spinal fracture, and she was the thin white lady. The only risk she didn't have was she wasn't a smoker. But you think, okay, so you start hormone replacing at the appropriate time in your 40s or 50s. Now you have less muscle loss, less sarcopenia, which means your risk of a fall absolutely declines significantly.
Yep,
and this is several decades after you start treatment. Now you have optimal bone health, which means if you do fall down, your risk of a catastrophic event and death, because falls in elderly are lethal events often. And that's just 2 things, let alone you're less confused because you have less risk of Alzheimer's. Your risk of cardiovascular disease goes down significantly. Like, it just goes on. And it reminds us of when May and I interviewed David Rosensweet, and he said, hormones, these sex hormones are the most powerful bio agents in the history of humanity, and we ignore them in allopathic medicine. And I was like, yeah, we suck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much that you said in there. I mean, so first off, the WHI study that I think you're referring to is the one from 2002 that was published in JAMA. And I mean, there's so much to say about it. So number one, a couple years prior, there was a study published with 30,000 people as opposed to 27,000 people, 27,000 women, which was the study that was published in JAMA. I think the study with, it was a Nurses' Health Initiative study that was published, I believe, in 1998, which said that there was absolutely no risk of estrogen causing breast cancer. And not only was there no risk, but there was a decreased risk of cardiovascular disease and a decreased risk of Alzheimer's and dementia that was found. So that study was published like just a few years before this WHI study was published. And then what I think is just so fascinating is that even today, people don't understand that the WHI study found that Premarin, which is conjugated equine estrogen, which we don't even really use anymore, had a decreased risk. That arm of the study had a decreased risk of estrogen, a decreased risk. And it was the PremPro, which was a combined estrogen and progestin, which we don't even use progestins. I mean, I could go on for a long time about why synthetic progestin. So it's really important that progestin is not progesterone. So progestins caused I think it was a relative risk of 1.26, which is not even statistically significant. So now you're talking about going from 3 in 1,000 women to 4 in 1,000 women are getting breast cancer on PremPro, which is progestin, and they halted hormone replacement therapy for 25 years from one study that had no statistically significant change. And I think it was Peter Attia who said that he interviewed one of the primary investigators of the study. And he said, what do you have to say for yourself? I mean, you basically let 4.5 million women go with on hormone replacement therapy for the past 2 decades because one study was done and nobody stood up to what the publication said in JAMA and how the publication was absolutely false. I mean, it wasn't even a little bit wrong. It was false, totally false reporting. They issued a retraction 4 years later in 2007 that nobody paid any attention to. And then not only did 4.5 million women not get hormone replacement therapy, but all of the people. So I'm part of that because I graduated in 2006. I didn't get any education, and I went to Johns Hopkins, by the way. So best hospital, best medical school in the world. I got no education about hormone replacement therapy, zero. And neither did any of my physician colleagues because, that causes estrogen. You're going to kill people. You can't give people hormones. You're going to give them breast cancer. You're going to cause all these problems. Someone's going to sue you. That's a big thing in the OBGYN world. Can't do that. You're going to get sued. Mm-hmm. And so we weren't educated for decades. Now they're starting to educate again. Now in OBGYN circles, they're starting to come back and they're starting to educate. Okay, estrogen is safe. Estrogen doesn't cause breast cancer. Progestins and progesterones, the difference between them, what bioidenticals are, what synthetic hormones are. But it's just beyond shocking. And then think about, somebody should do a study about what the effects, how many people have died because of, or have had significant morbidity and mortality because of this study. And they've had exactly what you mentioned. They've had cardiovascular disease prematurely. They've had a hip fracture and had, once you have a hip fracture, the life expectancy, I think is 18 months after 71. I think it's after a certain age. They've had, increased morbidity and mortality because of, or Alzheimer's and dementia that they missed out on a longer lifespan and a longer health span because they didn't take hormone replacement therapy at the appropriate time when they were the right candidate for it. And it really could have enhanced their longevity.
Well, it puts an exclamation point on the fact that crappy science is worse than no science at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There was a 2-paragraph letter in 1980 written to the New England Journal of Medicine, which started the entire opiate overprescribing by physicians. So that 2-paragraph letter to the editor, not a study, an opinion.
Yeah, it happens.
On a kind of study on 500 inpatients, was recited 610 times in journals, caused an explosion of opioid use, where when we started practice in 1994, when we applied for our Oregon licenses, they told us, you guys do a crappy job. You got to treat patients more for pain. And that that's been killing 100,000 people a year.
Right. It's just.
So I remember that because I was doing primary care at the time that all came out. And I just remember that flipping our world upside down. And my practice was 98% women. Called myself the psychogynecologist because I did a lot of counseling as well as basically gynae. But I just remember that happening going, oh my goodness, now what? At first. And then as I kind of looked at it, because everybody's pulling the plug on hormone replacement therapy and patients are being cut off. I personally kind of went, well, okay, why not treat everybody individually? Let's look at these numbers. But what if they don't have a breast cancer risk in their family anyway? They're getting a lot more benefit from this stuff and I would do the approach with my patient of informed consent. It's okay, they say that this might be the risk, but you feel better, you have a better sex life, your skin feels better. What is how is it impacting the rest of your life? And kind of went from there. And I got a bunch of flack for it, but anyway, it's insane. But
for an essentially non-existent relative risk. Yeah. Relative risk, there's lies, there's damned lies, then there's relative risk.
So,
that's what Mark Twain was really saying, because man, it's terrible.
So fast forward, I mean, we could hammer that out, but like, let's fast forward to the other thought that I have and that we've discussed and been over the last few years, where we're like, this makes no sense why people don't want to prescribe hormone replacement therapy. And it's very tough to find. For now, it's becoming more popular in the last 5 years, and they're popping up all over, from telemedicine companies to niched out things, more with alternative practices with naturopaths. And there's different reasons for that, why mainstream docs don't want to get involved. But I would say, well, this makes no sense. If you're deficient in your thyroid hormone, we don't have a problem giving you thyroid hormone replacement. If your pancreas doesn't work, we give you insulin. If you have Addison, if you have an adrenal problem, let's give you steroids and fluorocortef. But when as soon as you reach that magical age, because we're living longer and you're not producing testosterone as a man or estrogen, progesterone as a woman, that's supposed to be normal to be without all that. And no, you don't need it anymore.
It's normal if you live in a cave and die at 40.
So exactly.
Then it's normal.
So then we're thinking, well, why wouldn't you want to live like you were in your reproductive years, as far as feeling healthy and having great muscle mass and tone and strength and health of all your skin and etc. So I think that people are starting to understand the importance of it. So let's go back to talking about when women get, we were saying, into the 40s and 50s and looking at reproductive health and hormones and what you're taking, before we jump into actual HRT type stuff. Anything else? So is there a shift that needs to happen as far as like exercise plan? I mean, what if someone's like, I really don't want bioidentical hormones. What else can I take? Is there, and I've done a lot of reading, but just different supportive, what's the word for it? I'm having one of those words. Supportive
compounds?
No, they're not all herbs, but vitamins, herbs.
Nutraceuticals?
Yeah, there's another word for it. A lot of them are Indian-based herbs and things. I know that Stacey Sims, I don't know if you've read her books, Next Level and Roar, who talks about functional medicine, especially in athletes, but supportive things like ashwagandha and these things that help with hot flashes as well as night sweats, etc. Using those. But so what are your thoughts on implementing that? Exercise changes, working on building muscle mass instead of just worried about cardiovascular endurance. I mean, any other big things you start working with women on in their 40s, 50s?
Yeah. So, I've had the benefit of working with, thousands of women throughout my career. And so I've seen so many different types of women. And what's really beautiful is that really women don't fit into this like one type, one size fits all. And so I love it when someone comes out with like a new diet or a new, supplement, and they're like, this is amazing. And I'm like, it'll work probably for 10, 15, 20% of women, but 80, 85% of women, they're going to need something else. And that's where I'm a really big believer in precision medicine testing. I think that I don't know if it's going to be 10 years from now, 100 years from now, we're going to look back on this time and be like, wow, can you believe that people would like just go to the pharmacy and like pick up vitamins, and like they would just take a B complex and they didn't know which B vitamins they were deficient in. And they didn't know if they were an MTHFR homozygous methylator. Like I think that the more we can get that type of data, or the more a woman's willing to kind of spend the money. I mean, it's not super cheap. Those tests tend to cost, around hundreds of dollars to kind of find that information about themselves. The more they can start to piece together a much cleaner, a much smoother need for less vitamins, less supplementation, and the right type of adaptogens, and then the right type of hormones ultimately. So without those types of precision medicine testing vehicles, we're looking at more like what insurance tends to cover, which is kind of just like your basic hormone panel, and then symptoms. So I'll give you an example. So I've had all of the tests done. I've been doing this type of functional medicine testing, and there's so many of these tests on the market now.
Have you heard of hyperbaric therapy?
If you want better circulation, oxygenation, or respiration,
turn up the volume.
Everyone appreciates the increased energy and clarity.
Athletes say goodbye to those PRs because you're going to blast
So
them.
how does it work?
We load your body with oxygen.
That means
less inflammation,
fewer allergies,
faster healing, and more.
Come see us, 1200 Executive Parkway.
You know, the Upside Down building.
Call us 541-636-3278.
That's 541-636-3278.
We have some incredible deals.
Heal, build, and thrive
with New Leaf Hyperbarics.
Got air?
I was going to say, well, we interviewed different people, we hear different things. So that would be the first thing is do you start with testing? And if so, what testing do you use? Because we hear, people using this stuff called Dutch testing, which maybe we'll have to explain to our listeners. And other specialists like Rose and Sweet say, no, that's not good. You need urinary levels done. And others say, to do, like you said, the detailed genetic cytochrome testing, which I've had done, is expensive. So what do you do? What's your thoughts since you've had it all done as well?
Yeah.
And what do you use to?
Yeah. So, there's like, if you're, willing to spend about $1,000 on your lab testing, I usually say there's about 4 tests that I really recommend. So definitely like a basic, annual blood test that, your regular PCP can order, combine that with a hormone panel. And a lot of times that's going to be covered by insurance. So that includes things like, CRP, CBC, complete blood count, chemistry panel, hemoglobin A1C, fasting insulin, and then like a regular hormone panel, like an estradiol, progesterone, testosterone free and total, prolactin. You can get a DHEA, those types of kind of basic comprehensive homocysteine types of testing done. And a lot of times women don't want to spend out of pocket money, and that's all we're working with. And at Femgevity, we work with women where they're at. And so we're working with that and their symptoms. And that's great. And that's probably like 70% of the equation, or 60 to 70% of the equation. If someone's like, okay, I want to do one more test, the gut microbiome test is the next test I recommend. So there's just so we've been doing gut microbiome testing. I've been doing gut microbiome testing for probably 10 years. I am just shocked when I balance someone's gut. It's a lot of the same things. It's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It's dysbiosis. So you have like overgrowth of, even though it's good bacteria, it's overgrowth of certain good bacteria, leaky gut, so that's showing that certain IgA is getting reabsorbed back into the small intestine, like back into the bloodstream from the small intestine. There's sometimes we'll find there's like a gluten sensitivity. We'll find certain metabolites in the stool, serotonin metabolites, or we'll find estrogen metabolites in the stool. And so it's so helpful to see a gut microbiome test. Those tests run around $200 to $300, depending on like which lab you use. After that, it's helpful to get some sort of allergy testing, because very similarly, you don't want to be ingesting something that you're actually allergic to or you've developed a sensitivity to. There's lots of different ways to get allergy testing. It can be done through blood, through IgG, IgE, or through skin. I think allergists do skin allergy testing.
They still do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that having an allergy test can also be very, very helpful. That's usually like, those are the next kind of 2 things that I recommend. After that, I really like to go into a micronutrient level. So looking at, your blood, we all know is like your body's very good at like maintaining homeostasis. So it's going to like kill itself to make sure that your RBC magnesium level is normal and your folate level in your blood is normal. But how is it really on a cellular level? And like, are you a high metabolizer or a low metabolizer of certain medications? Or supplements even, or vitamins. So are you, running a high copper or a low copper, or zinc, selenium, B12, anything? So micronutrient is just, there's so much to be gained from a micronutrient test. Again, those tests, like an allergy test, these tests each run about like $300 each. And then the last test that I really like to do is some sort of genomic test. And this is where you're going to get things like, do you have APOE? Do you have FTO gene? Do you have MTHFR gene? Do you have MAOA gene? And all of these different genes, there are a few labs that are running, usually about 3,000 SNPs or so. that can tell you, are you carrying certain cardiogenetic genes, certain genes for cancer? If that's where, if a woman's open to kind of understanding that information about herself. I did these tests on myself and I found that actually turmeric is reactive for me, that's going to upregulate certain genes that I don't want upregulated. And so that's a really comprehensive picture on how to kind of move through even something like menopause with the minimal amount of supplements and hormones necessary. Now, even women who have all those tests, sometimes they still need supplements, or they can still benefit from hormones because, like I said in the beginning, like the way we farm, we're supposed to rest soil, we're supposed to rotate crops, we're supposed to, we're supposed to like live in harmony with the land. So like our food doesn't have the same amount of nutrients in it that it did 100 years ago. We're also supposed to eat a much higher amount of fish than we do. Most of us are omega deficient, so there's a lot of things that I find that I usually, even in someone who's like a marathon runner and eats like the cleanest, most perfect diet for themselves, they'll still need a few tweaks and things here and there. And then from a menopause perspective, everybody is so different that I kind of use the analogy of nausea and vomiting in pregnancy. So same thing, like I'll have like the vegan yoga teacher that has hyperemesis and can't even keep water down. They're so nauseous and have so much vomiting. And someone who is eating Fritos and McDonald's every day that has no nausea and vomiting at all and everything in between. And so we don't have the predictive analytics yet, although Femgevity is hoping to someday get there. That's a pie in the sky dream of ours. But we don't have the predictive analytics yet of like what genes predict how you're going to go through menopause, or what characteristics can predict. We know that how your mom went through menopause isn't predictive of how you're going to go through menopause, just like how your mom went through pregnancy isn't predictive of how you're going to go through pregnancy. So even though someone has a very healthy life, does the gut microbiome testing and genetic testing and has all their micronutrient supplements right, they still might benefit from hormone replacement, bioidenticals, adaptogens, nutraceuticals, but they can often get away with much, 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 much less with precision medicine testing.
I love this because first off, the first thought I know Tim was thinking too is that we've never heard anyone in this realm talk about the importance of the gut microbiome, and we're huge believers in the new world of gut microbiome health. And we are really good friends with Dr. Sabine Hazen, who's, has a research lab and pioneer, and she's been on our show. But the importance of that and what you're doing is, I think, yay for you guys, because I think it's huge. And then the next thing is, you're right. It used to be the whole, just take one a day, a multivitamin, just to cover it all, a smattering. And honestly, it's not probably
your Apple Jacks.
High enough doses of what you need to really do anything. So it's just like you're just kind of splattering it out there. And I would tell my, friends, patients, it's just like, well, you're probably taking too much. You're spending money on all this stuff you don't need and urinating it out, or taking the wrong thing. And to your point, yes, people think, oh, turmeric, like I'm taking it because it's an anti-inflammatory and I need it. But maybe based on my specific genetic makeup and how I metabolize things. And you talked about some people metabolize medicines and micronutrients and drugs faster or slower than others. Maybe it's not a good idea. So that precision medical testing is so important to know before you do anything.
You can pay for $1,000 of testing very quickly with decreasing a lot of supplements.
That's right. So people balk at the cost up front. But you're right.
But they're spending $400 a month on supplements, and maybe only.
I think what we get from Amazon and all these high quality supplements, and I'm like, maybe we don't need them. So. Great point.
Yeah. So I want to just mention that there's actually something called the estroblome. And I don't know if you've heard about that, but that's a huge thing in what we do. So there's all these different metabolites that we look for in the gut that let us know if someone's like recirculating their old estrogen metabolites in their gut. So there's a lot of interesting research coming out, all in like very small studies, and like nobody's doing them, more than 1,000 people. But there's a lot of really interesting work going on with estrogen and gut microbiome balancing. And that's why it's the first thing I usually recommend. If someone's like, I don't want HRT, I'm like, great, let's pay $300. Let's get this test done. And I think we can work with you. And the other thing about that too is that, there's so many different options. Like, it doesn't have to be like this one size fits all. Like, they can, kind of pick and choose what they want to do. And it doesn't have to be just taking hormones. It can be really something more specific.
So based on that, I wanted to get into what you think then is like a diet, because a diet is food and fuel, and
Yes.
it makes up your body and it impacts your health. So what diet, if you had to pick a diet, or how do you even start for longevity now we're talking about women specifically, but I don't know if it crosses over to men. So what, in your experience, is the best sort of supportive diet as women cross over into menopause and beyond?
So right off the bat, I tend to look for insulin resistance, because in about a third of women, that's like the lowest hanging fruit. And that's something that's going to go up right away. And as we get older, we're going to become more insulin resistant over time. So we look at fasting insulin levels. We do sometimes have women wear CGMs or continuous glucose monitors to see if this is really an issue. Sometimes you can do oral glucose tolerance tests and draw insulin levels. I think it's like beyond fascinating how in medicine we're giving glucose tolerance tests to people and not drawing insulin levels with them. But, most of the time in someone who's got a hemoglobin A1C teetering around 5.5 and a fasting insulin that's over 7, they're insulin resistant. And so for those women specifically, they usually will do better on a low carb diet, or that's when they'll do well with the intermittent fasting, or they'll do well on a ketogenic diet. Like, those diets can sometimes be better. So for women who don't have insulin sensitivity, or they aren't showing any signs of that, the next thing I'll tend to look at is I'll look at their cholesterol levels. So sometimes women who actually have high LDLs, they can sometimes be, and I've never seen anybody I've never really seen any studies on this. I kind of just have experienced this myself, that women who have high LDLs that have normal weights and don't have any elevation in their liver enzymes that would kind of indicate like why they might have high LDLs, sometimes tend to do better on like a vegetable diet or a vegan diet. And that's when they might do better with not so much the intermittent fasting, but like the smaller meals spread out throughout the day and the plant-based protein type of diet. And other than that, if I don't find either of those things, then a lot of times women know what type of diet has worked for them. And then it's just usually like the counseling around the psychology of like, okay, well, what's worked for you in the past? Why aren't you doing it? Let's see about like how we can help support making this happen for you, like making wise choices, not eating late at night because that's really harmful for the gut, and kind of moving on from there.
Imagine that.
But that is never
a personalized diet that's
yes.
based on what works for you.
I've talked about the only thing cultier than Jim Jones is diets. And it really is. I mean, we have interviewed 2 or 3 carnivores. We've had a vegan on our show. We had a kid that lost 200 pounds intermittent fasting. And our conclusion is the only diet that matters is the diet that works. And so, if it works for you, great. I'm absolutely in 100% agreement. I think for people with the metabolic syndrome, there's no question that a low carb diet works the best. Is it for everybody? Probably not.
Right.
There's tons of ethnic stuff. Like when we talked to Sabine about gut microbiome and how, what your ancestors have eaten for centuries actually helps determine what you are going to be able to metabolize more efficiently. Like it's
genetically,
genetically and even to the gut microbiome. It's super. This stuff is crazy, and we're barely scratching the surface on this. The one that does get me, though, is I've had patients, and they come in, and they're like, yeah, I lost 75 pounds. I said, what did you do? And then they did whatever. Obviously, it was wildly successful. I'm like, why aren't you still doing it? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either.
I'm like, well, didn't you feel better? Oh, man, I haven't felt that good in 25 years. Yeah, well, you feel like crap now. Why don't you just go back and do what you were doing? You don't need to see me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's what I'm going to ask, and you can let us know like your thoughts or what you've read, because I was just reading Mercola's book and all about mitochondrial metabolism and how the mitochondria really determine, if they're functioning at their best, it's their best health and longevity. And so now there's a big push into these diet plans, especially intermittent fasting, so that you can get autophagy going in the cells so that the mitochondria get to clean up. And so it's more of you need to do the intermittent fasting to obtain health and longevity and maximal life. Because once you're through the reproductive years of building muscle and preparing and building, then the body starts dying off. And so then basically he's saying you flip the switch, and after reproductive years are over, and for men as they get to the mid ages, menopause, when testosterone's declining, that fasting is more important because of what happens at the cellular level with the mitochondria and autophagy. So what's your thoughts on that? Or if you don't?
Yeah, I actually, I believe in that. I don't think intermittent fasting is long enough to get into autophagy. The research I've seen is you need at least 3 days of fasting. So it's hard to do. I think fasting takes, if someone has, so again, like when I counsel someone and they have those 4 types of risks, again, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, neuro disease, and cancer. If someone has a very significant risk of cancer and they're really interested in reducing their risk of cancer, I will recommend fasting, 3-day fasting. And it's something that you have to build up to. So I'll tell them, okay, start with 24, then go to 36, then go to 48, then go to 3-day. And there is a company called Prolon, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with that company. They do a fasting mimicking diet, actually a 5-day fasting mimicking diet. And they say that their clinical trials indicate that their fasting mimicking diet, which I think is like 1,100 calories the first day, 500 the next day, and then 350, I think the subsequent 3 days, is the equivalent of fasting. I don't know that I buy it, but I do know that it works to train someone if they're interested in fasting. So I've done that myself. I did Prolong the first time. It kind of worked as a security blanket. I knew the food was there in case I needed to eat it. It's like a little cracker, one day, like 10 a.m. have a cracker. It's like 5 p.m. have a soup or something like that. And so I really do believe in what you're saying about mitochondrial health, rejuvenation. I really believe in autophagy and apoptosis. But my analysis of the research is that you really need 5 days. You really need 3 days. I think more than 3 days, there's really not a difference. But
I think it's like a field, just like the gut microbiome, that we're starting to look at so many different thoughts and experiments. And I think they're just starting to figure that out.
But curiously, in every world religion / ancient wisdom, fasting is part of it. We interviewed Jake Thomas,
right?
Who was, he brought up a point. It's the single thing from that interview that stuck with me, which was, he said, all of these great, thinkers in the past have 3 things in common. 1 is prolonged fasting, 2 is isolation, and 3 is very long walks. And you think of that and you kind of go, well, yeah, it's common sense. And you look back, the ketogenic diet is over 100 years old, and it was started to mimic fasting for people that had seizure disorders.
Yeah, epilepsy, yeah.
And none of this stuff is new. And it's like the wash of the pharma industry, because that was the next cool thing, and for good reason. I mean, the dawn of antibiotics at the end of the 1940s, and there are some really great pharma, products that came out that really changed the world. But then, of course, because it worked for a little while, then we just need more of that. And I liken it even to processed food. Processed food was actually a really good idea till it wasn't. Because rotten food was way worse than processed food. Now processed food is causing chronic illness. Right? No, but that's exactly.
I'd rather eat my moldy tomato than
when we forget that certain things, ancient wisdom is not ancient BS. If it was ancient BS, we wouldn't know about it because we'd have forgotten about it, 10,000 years ago. And so we need to go back to some of these things and look, okay, what worked before? Maybe it actually still works, because a lot of things we do, they work till they don't, but we don't have the ability to go, this isn't working anymore.
Right. Like just because it's the way we've always done it doesn't mean that it's still the right way to keep doing it.
Right. Like, I mean, you graph when the United States started pumping high fructose corn syrup into everything, which was the mid 70s. And it's the exact same graph as obesity. And you go, well, maybe there's a connection there. Well, no, correlation is not causation. Yeah, but Fruit Loops are. It's like, it's common sense. There's an entire industry of, it just makes me crazy. It makes me crazy. Like the cereal aisle makes me insane, because that is,
you don't even eat cereal.
No, exactly. But I've called breakfast cereal is nutritional pornography.
Yeah. Well, what's a really good tip is, like, most of the time, I would say like 9 times out of 10, when a woman comes into me in pregnancy and she's like, I don't know why I'm gaining weight. I'm gaining so much weight in 26 weeks. And I'm like, are you eating cereal for breakfast? And like 9 times out of 10, she's like, yeah, I am. I'm like, that's why.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Start your day off with a massive insulin.
Someone's eating it, because those aisles keep getting bigger and bigger. And I think almost 2 aisles.
I have no idea when the last time a box of cereal was in our house. Must have been when the kids were home.
I don't know. Yeah. Man, so I have so many more questions about everything.
Yeah, but just one thing too quick about diet and for women in general is that, like the only blanket thing I will say is that most women 40 and 50 are not getting enough protein. So that usually is true for most women. So that's like kind of like a general place to start. A lot of times when I'm not losing weight, I'm having a hard time. And then I'm like, count your protein. And they're like 15 grams or 20 grams. And so usually just like upping that or doubling it makes a huge, huge difference. That and water, sometimes women can lose 5-8 pounds just by doing that alone. And so that's like a super easy trick to lose weight.
Right.
That's really effective.
It's a really good point. We worked with a trainer last year, someone that I followed online for years, and then both of us did. And I've always liked meat, been a big meat eater. So you can trick yourself into thinking, oh yeah, I'm great because I like this. And then I started tracking, and I was blown away at how low in protein I really was, even though I feel like I was eating so much. So it's, tracking that, just getting data is very helpful, which basically is everything. And I was going to say so many more questions about so many specific things. But
it's amazing. It's amazing how powerful it is for weight loss.
Yes. Very powerful. Really.
You lose weight faster.
Yep,
you lose fat faster, and you gain muscle. Like the two greatest things you can do from a body composition.
Right.
Yeah.
But basically, pretty much, there's no one blanket answer for everything, and everybody wants to just know: is it a keto diet? Is it just I just need to take magnesium or chromium, or do I just take hormone replacement or?
Well, it's obviously a massive bong of weed a day, because that's what the weed guys tell you.
Yeah. That fixes everything, right?
Everything. And if it doesn't, you don't care.
Exactly. But health is so specific, and that's basically what you're doing there with testing and tailoring specific needs to like everybody's individual health needs and wants too, because you're right. Not everybody wants certain things. Everyone has different priorities. For someone, it might be hiking daily with their spouse. That's important to go on long hikes. For others, it's, more sedentary type things, but very specific tailored healthcare is basically what you're looking at.
Isn't that what everybody wants?
Yeah. Pretty much.
So
that's like,
so I'm curious if you,
yeah, I think we're going to ask the exact same thing.
I don't. I was just going to say, is there any, if that's a starting jumping off point, say if someone wants to work with you, but books, I know you like Peter Attia, is there any kind of books you'd recommend as a starting point for menopause or healthcare for women or men or both, and what to look for?
Yeah. So, fortunately or unfortunately, there haven't been a lot of great books written about either of these topics. So obviously Peter Attia has written a book called Outlive. It's a very new book. It came out in March of 2023, so this year. And that's probably like the best longevity book we have. I don't honestly know another book that comes close when it comes to longevity. For menopause, same. There's not really any great books. Dr. David Rosensweet's book is pretty good. I think it's called Happy, Healthy Hormones.
Yes. And we had him on our show and we linked that. Yes.
Yeah, that's a pretty good book to kind of give you an overview. One thing that he's very big into, you mentioned this briefly about the Dutch urine testing. Our testing is way more advanced now. We don't need to do 24-hour urine collection testing anymore.
Thank God.
Yeah. So we don't need to do that. Also that testing is expensive. One Dutch urine test costs about, I think $240 or $300. And so sending that in every time you want to get your hormones tested, it is a lot. And now we have, you can test metabolites in the urine with just a morning sample. And there's another book called Estrogen Matters, which was written by Dr. Avram Blumring, who is a hematology oncologist. And he co-wrote it with a woman called Carol Travers, who was a PhD in a soft science. I can't remember which one. I don't know if it was psychology or sociology. But they wrote a really good book called Estrogen Matters, which kind of like gives a lot of light to the WHI study. And I think people who are still afraid, because I hear that all the time, even though it's been disproven and disproven and disproven, people are still afraid of HRT. It has a stigma attached to it.
Absolutely. I'm going to link those books in our show notes.
Yeah, it's just
for the listeners.
It just blows my mind. It's like saying TRT is the same as taking stanozolol.
Yeah.
Just because they're both androgens doesn't mean, it's just it's. I'd love to take stanozolol if it didn't melt your liver, give you cancer, and make you die.
Yeah.
Other than that, great.
Right.
Okay.
No problem.
So, where do we find you? How do we sign up for you to see me online and everybody else now that wants to make an appointment? Tell us a little bit about Femgevity, how to find the company, and
so our website is femgevityhealth.com. We're on all the social channels at Femgevity. And, one of the big things, we haven't found any company that's kind of doing hormone replacement in a telemedicine way, the way that we are. Obviously we're taking a very customized, tailored approach, offering, not requiring, but offering a lot of precision medicine testing for those who kind of want to take that approach towards managing menopause and managing their, 40s, 50s and into longevity. And we are more than happy to hear from anyone, and even men, at any of those channels. And usually it's really easy to get me to by reaching out on any of those channels as well.
So can you prescribe across the country, or how does that work?
That's a really good question. So we are currently in New York, New Jersey, and Florida. And then what we're doing in all the other states is we're offering this thing called care advocacy. So we will partner with you. We offer counseling, coaching, and you would have to order your blood work through your physician or through your healthcare provider. But then we would be able to coach you on, okay, this is what's recommended based on your symptoms and based on the results.
Perfect. Still helpful and still awesome. So all 50 states, there you go. And what about, I'm assuming if you're doing the coaching, someone from, say, our sister country, Canada, could still hop on and
Yep.
Okay,
Flashes, eh?
We, we're from Canada. We have a lot of listeners from there, and I know people that'd be interested. So I just wanted to throw that up.
They are. And it's real. I tried to do some research on just even a TRT clinic for one of my friends, and I was just like, holy crap, this is difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Kristin, thank you so much for your time, for being on here. This has been actually amazingly awesome information, and I love what you guys are doing. And I just think that, man, having a better, longer life is the goal of most of us.
And then I'll help you launch the men's side.
Great.
Dudegevity. There you go.
I love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. Dugevity.
Dugevity. Yeah, that'd be good. We'll get a bunch of,
I thought you
beach
were going to
bros.
call it brogevity or something.
Yeah, you could do that too.
Anyway, he's all about the marketing. Thanks again for your time. And we hope that you'll be soon flooded with all of our listeners reaching out to you.
Well, that one really surprised me. Although when you're talking to somebody that went to Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, and New York University, they're probably not an underachiever. And that definitely was a great interview. You could just taste Kristin's passion for helping women she's helped women her entire life.
So what surprised you? Because I was surprised as well, and I'll share what my thoughts were, but what stood out to you?
Well, what stood out to me is how every single person that we talk to about what works and what doesn't work in healthcare end up all at the same place. Low carb diets come up, hormone replacement comes up, appropriate exercise comes up, sleep comes up. I mean, that was maybe the only thing we didn't address with Kristin was sleep, but it's all the same stuff said in a different way. And now there's all of these businesses like Femgevity that are coming alongside physicians, that are aiding physicians, that maybe are taking the place of some of the things that you would get from your regular doctor to actually make you healthy and not just treat your high blood pressure. And I just love that.
Yeah. For me, I think I know that there's a lot of companies starting up with mid-levels and physicians that kind of follow an algorithm and are advancing, hormone replacement therapy, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, and doing high-end billing, and I call kind of a cookbook therapies. So for me, this was a pleasant surprise because they actually are doing personalized care, and not that anyone else isn't, but she really emphasized that. And that was the theme to me, was you don't have to go on hormone replacement therapy to get coached and counseled and get their expertise and what the right plan is for you. Maybe you don't want to take hormones, but they're still going to work with you and find the right diet, exercise, vitamin plan or no vitamin plan. And my other big surprise was when we talked about the gut microbiome and how important that is in your health, and they believe it too. I think this is cutting edge stuff that we are just tipping the iceberg on, but it really is important. And so I'm so excited.
If you can tip an iceberg, I would like to get that on video.
I think I said the tip of the iceberg, but
it sounded like you said tipping. Is that like cow tipping, but now we're iceberg tipping?
No, I think of it when we were kids and we were on that raft out on the lake in the summer. It was like a little floaty raft, and we would try to tip that floating wood raft over that was tied to giant barrels, and it wasn't going to tip.
And let's be honest, in the wilds of northern Manitoba, that was essentially an iceberg. At least the water was the same temperature. So
exactly.
Even in the middle of August. Oh, come on, kids, the water's 58.
Okay, so we were rocking the boat. There you go.
Yes. So,
and that's what I think this is doing, rocking the boat in the way of thinking.
Yeah, and this is really, it's just so close to the heart of what we want to do with the podcast is just feature people that are like, there's a different way. As I've said before, we're not going to fix the healthcare system from the inside of the healthcare system. That is not going to happen.
No,
it's going to happen by people demanding a different service and leaving the system and going someplace else.
So I love this because then we got to actually meet after the interview, her partner, Michelle, had a great conversation, very like-minded women, just
common sense, man.
It's
just common sense.
Right. I just love it. They're just out there creating something unique. And
we may add, very affordable.
Yes.
I mean, it's just really
compared to what local prices and other ones online that I've looked at. This is very affordable, reasonable, and wow. I think I'm going to become a patient myself.
You're going to get femgevitized?
Yeah, exactly.
Get femgevitized.
Anyway, like collecting stool samples, right, Tim? Yeah.
Well, it's amazing how the microbiome comes up everywhere. It's just like you can't escape that shit.
When it comes down to playing with your poop.
Well, I don't play with it.
I guess that's a good point.
I'm not a monkey. I am a man.
Anyway, check out their website. I'll put all the links in the show notes, as well as the books that she mentioned. And I hope that you can just better. That's not even a word. You can better your health and your life, and better living, longer living, all those things. Thanks for being here, and we will talk to you guys later.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
But we've tried to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible. We can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.